Okay, so today we're going to be looking at evolution. There's a lot of stuff to look at with evolution. Evolution is one of the, basically the kind of main arc narrative for biological anthropology. Biological anthropology can also be useful for the other fields when you're trying to make sense of archaeology. Some biology is actually very relevant. For example, you look at old fossils and you'll start to see, well, what was able to breathe and what did the ability to breathe do to the sediment? And now how can I learn from the sediment the stages of evolution, that kind of thing, right? So it's relevant. It's also relevant. Biological anthropology is going to be relevant to all of the fields. It's relevant to the way that our voice box works, which is relevant to our linguistics. But first and foremost, let's focus today, and it'll be mostly what we're doing with biological anthropology, on evolution. Now, the second part of biological anthropology that's especially significant is primatology. And this is, again, it's actually about evolution again, only in this case, it's more about behavioral evolution. So the study of primates is kind of the study of different behaviors and an attempt to show how these behaviors emerge. So the study of primates is, in some ways, again, a study of our evolution and where we came from and how we got to where we are, only that's a little bit more behavioral, which is interesting. And then we get into how the fields could actually split a million more times than into just these four fields. In fact, they do. These are just kind of the granddaddy fields. Okay, so let's get into evolution. Before we do, let's talk about an idea that happened way before evolution came to be. How old this concept is, really have no idea. But we find it in ancient Egypt. We find it in the Vedas in India. We find it with Pythagoras, and we find it in the first Christian theologian, Origen. So, whose name I think I probably spelled wrong. I spell things wrong. One of the failures of my evolution. So the transmigration of souls is about actually the evolution of the soul. So for the Hindus, the ultimate incarnation on this earth is as a cow, as a heifer. So the idea is that we evolve from gems and all the way up into more simple organisms until eventually we're more complex organisms, until we're humans, until we're cows. And so the idea is that we actually go through this kind of evolution of consciousness through our rebirth in different animals. And the different animals shape our consciousness so that our consciousness can grow. Really interesting stuff. So this, of course, is built into this notion is reincarnation. Now, transmigration of souls does not always present a linear progression. It's possible that if you, it's said that if you beat a dog, you may be reincarnated as a dog, because that may be the lesson that you need. That's the perspective that you need to have, something that was missing. So your evolution may be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But in general, the idea is in the transmigration of souls that we are kind of, our souls are moving in some sort of almost evolutionary way behind the biological, through the different animals. This is, of course, not evolution. Evolution is going to be specifically about how did those animals evolve from one into the next. Are these ideas integratable? That's up for you guys to think about. But I want to introduce, but way before we start talking about evolution, this notion is already there. Another really old concept for evolution, old vision of it, goes back to the very, very, very first philosophers. Thales, the first philosopher, according to Aristotle, is from a place, Ionian coast, a place called Miletus. Miletus is the Eden of Western philosophy. So Thales' protege, Anaximander, had an early notion of where we came from. Anaximander says that we came from fish, that before we were humans, we were fish that came onto the land. And then we kind of came out of them almost like we were coming out of a womb. This has some old mythological precedents, right? So the idea that we came from the water can be found in lots of myths, where things started with the cosmic ocean, like Nu, for example. And then the emergence of everything from the water. So we see these kind of linear progressions in a religious, mythological sense, spiritual way. And the point is that by the time we get to the hyper-intellectual Darwinism, that there's been a evolution of ideas. So here we have Anaximander and his notion that we came from fish. Now that's, we're talking, I'm not going to get it right, but somewhere between 700-ish BC, something like that. Okay, so let's check this out as a starting place.
I don't understand evolution, and I had to protect my kids from understanding it. We will not give in to the thinkers.
You people are as loud as you are ignorant. Now get back on your turnip trucks and go home. That is an insultingly accurate stereotype, sir. As a professor of science, I assure you that we did in fact evolve from filthy monkey men.
I cannot speak for you, sir, but my ancestors were not monkeys. They were orangutans. Hard-working, patriotic orangutans.
Dr. Banjo?
In the fur. And I remind you that evolution is merely a theory, like gravity or the shape of the earth.
Hey, Professor, I'm a flying spaghetti monster. You seriously believe I'm descended from some kind of flightless manicotti?
Yes!
Oh, please. A far more logical explanation is the undisprovable science of creaturism. All life was created in its present form 7,000 years ago by a fantastical creature from outer space.
Bunk!
Oh? If your elitist East Coast evolution is real, why has no one found the missing link between modern humans and ancient apes?
We did find it. It's called Homo erectus.
Then you have proven my case, sir. For no one has found the link between apes and this Homo erectus.
Yes, they have. It's called Homo habilis.
Aha! But no one has found the missing link between ape and the so-called Homo habilis.
Yes, they have. It's called Australopithecus africanus.
Oh, I've got you now. Fair enough. But where, then, is the missing link between apes and this Darwinius macilli? Answer me that, Professor.
Oh, okay. Granted that one missing link is still missing. But just because we haven't found it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Pshaw! Things don't exist simply because you believe in them. Thus saith the almighty creature in the sky!
First of all, watch Futurama. Fantastic show, and it's one of the more philosophical shows out there, to be honest with you. So right here, we saw several of the major conversations surrounding evolution introduced. So first of all, this debate of creation versus evolution. So we have the story that God created the earth and created humans, right? So in the Adam was created from clay, Eve came from Adam's rib, or Prometheus created humans out of clay and awakened them with fire, often from Athena. So these are stories of human creation. And in fact, by the way, if you look at most stories, most mythologies will have some notion of humans being created from a type of clay or dough. For example, in the Popol Vuh, in the Mayan tradition, it ends up being a type of dough, which is very interesting. And it actually starts out, I believe it's mud, then maybe wood. Anyway, you have these visions of people being created from material substances. So creation versus evolution. You heard Dr. Banjo say that everything was, all the species were created 7,000 years ago on the mark, and that nothing has really evolved or changed since. Some creationists believe that there is adaptation, that all these species were created and they've been fluctuating around with some adaptations or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they all come from some original origin. This is, of course, debated by a lot of people. Well, who debates creationism versus evolution? Before we start talking about the different kind of perspectives too much, let's recognize that these positions are taken by science and religion, typically. This turns into a fight between science and religion, which turns into a fight for some between intellectual elitists and God-fearing, patriotic, heartland type of people. And you saw this in the episode, actually. So what you realize is that motivations exist behind the argument. Somebody that you want to accept evolution, and you're like, how do you not accept evolution? Evolution is so obvious. Well, somebody else doesn't just see that as accepting some perspective. They see it as giving up another perspective, a belief that God is a creator. And that thought may be more difficult to give up than it is for evolution to be adopted. Some of us may try to make sense of how they can fit together. Some of us might not. I had an incredible conversation one time with a philosopher named Slavoj Zizek, who some of you, if you saw the movies Children of Men, he did the commentary for Children of Men. And when Zizek came, he said that to my college, University of the South in Tennessee, he said that he thought that creationism was that any effort of the creationists, any effort of the religious believers to try to integrate evolution into their understanding, he thought that that was fundamentally didn't work. He's like, you're just giving into another paradigm. You're giving into the scientific paradigm. You have a completely different paradigm, and you're speaking in their language instead of insisting on your own. Of course, he wasn't championing creationism. He was just trying to deconstruct a perspective. I had a chance to talk with him about it, and I asked, well, you know, he's actually a major philosopher, had been majorly influenced by Hegel. And Hegel has this notion, what we remember Hegel is describing the synthesis. So the synthesis is this idea that there's a thesis, there's an antithesis, and then there's some sort of integration of that thesis and antithesis. And so I asked him, I was like, you know, do you think that science and religion, and by the way, for Hegel, the thesis and antithesis resolve in a becoming, in a process, in a verb. So religion, science, thesis, antithesis. But for him, then I asked him, I said, but couldn't religion and science be part of each other's becoming in that synthesis? We had a really rich conversation. He was very positive in that response. But that's not the point. The point is that this is a major debate. It's existed for a long time and is very political. It is not just scientific. I'll ask you, do you know of any debates that you think of as scientific that come across as more political? Of course, one of the big questions is, should evolution exist in our textbooks? In some states, it does not. And why does it not? Because those who support religion have argued that it should not be included. So this is a really challenging issue because it's not a challenge. The science is not the challenge. There's some other stuff. We'll talk about some of the science. It's very political. The point is to recognize that there are deeper paradigms motivating our perspectives. And this is very, very important to this class. You're going to hear a lot, I'm sure, from Rosalie, for example, about colonialism, right? So a lot of times our expressed idea about why we're doing something is often a kind of rationalization, a type of topical persona play, an effort to make ourselves look like heroes, when beneath the surface, there's some deeper motivation about why we're doing what we're doing, or why someone's doing what they're doing. So when evolution is critiqued, when natural selection is critiqued, is it really a critique on the science, or is it really a political, emotional battle? Okay, so what else happened? You saw in there, he described evolution as a theory, like gravity and the Earth that's circular Earth that's not flat, right? So now we're starting to connect. We start to see this relationship that happens in our minds between somebody who resists evolution and somebody who believes the Earth is flat. And then if you let that continue, more associations are going to be made, right or wrong. The people who don't believe in evolution happen to also be the people that don't believe in a lot of other scientific stuff. And those people who don't believe in evolution are often looking for divine answers. These may be the people that don't seek medical support and instead pray, right? You see this start to break down in the different ways of seeing the world and approaching the world. Theory, by the way, is a very critical recognition that even the theory of gravity, the theory of the circular Earth, actually, I'm not sure we can call that a theory. I'm pretty sure that is an empirical fact with all of our information. But the theory of gravity is an interesting concept. Does it mean that it's just an idea That would be a hypothesis. A theory, we have a lot of reasons to believe a theory, unlike a hypothesis, which is just a thought we want to explore. So a theory, in this case, is very, very, very strong. There are a lot of reasons to believe it, but there are some things to ask as well. So, by the way, going back to this question of creationism versus evolution, we have this idea of, did we really come from apes? And now we're going to get beyond the religious question and just get to that like pride question. I think saying that we didn't come from apes was also a very much a pride thing, right? This was going on, especially during the Civil War. This was kind of an ongoing conversation about evolution and did we really come from apes, right? It can be hard for us to accept certain things based on our own pride. So we need to recognize this. As we move in, we're just using evolution as an example to look at the way that our biases can interfere with our ability to engage a theory and a science. Our pride can interfere. Our pre-existing religious, spiritual, philosophical perspectives can interfere. And so the challenge when you're in school, the challenge is to try and learn every paradigm on its own terms. Outside of your class, you're going to be trying to make sense of it all, as you should. I hope you will. I used to have teachers that discouraged me from trying to make sense of it all because that's hard to teach. But of course, that's what you're going to do. It's what you got to do, especially as artists. But as you do, recognize that it will help you the most to really try to learn a class on its own terms. Okay, so let's dig into evolution a little bit more. Survival of the fittest. The preservation of favorable variations and the rejection of injurious variations I call natural selection, or the survival of the fittest. Let's look at a couple examples.
May we help you, strange ones?
We are travelers from the past, my good runt.
I see. Since your time, human evolution has diverged.
Here are we, advanced in intellect and morality.
And the Dumlocks, stupid, vicious brutes who live underground.
Advanced in intellect, you say? Have you invented a backwards time machine?
No, but if we apply our superior minds, we could perfect such a device within 5 years.
See you then.
We're back for our time machine. Ow!
So, of course, we have in the survival of the fittest, we have the question of brain versus brawn. What does it mean? What is the fittest? Let's keep asking that question. Let's watch another one of these.
On a distant planetoid, they evolved to cooperate in their quest to survive.
Cooperation, because life is a team sport.
But over time, one species evolved a better strategy. And an evolutionary arms race began.
Awesome, right? That's the basic idea, right? Predator versus prey. That's one of the simplest versions through which we understand ways that we understand natural selection, right? So somebody spots helps them hide from a predator. Predator has better eyes, can now see motion. So, right, we know dinosaurs, we believe they didn't really see dinosaur predators. We don't believe that they saw very much motion, right? So freezing was a very successful strategy. That was not a successful strategy with a predator like us, where we can now make a little bit more sense of our visual environment without motion. So this survival of the fittest is, you get it, it's very, very simple. It's simple as this. If you didn't get eaten, you get to have children. If you were able to eat, you get to have children. There's this incredible line from Cloud Atlas that I like to think about. It's a little dark, and it's this simple. The strong do eat. That's basically it. Survival of the fittest. The strong do eat. And so there's just this ongoing arms race of predator versus prey. And then you have the question of, well, what is a better predator? Is it a smarter predator or is it a stronger predator? Great question. Great question. You know, I love, if any of you guys saw the movie Starship Troopers, you actually have an intergalactic, a huge space battle between the bugs and the humans. And effectively, it's a battle of evolution versus progress. You've got these advanced technologies versus a kind of almost more less thinking, more quasi-conscious insect race. Now, the insect race is so evolved that they can go to space and they can, you know, really fight. You know, they have weapons that can compete with the most advanced space weapons. But this is a great example of an ongoing question. You know, maybe the battle between intelligence and strength may continue forever. That might be an ongoing struggle forever between brains and strength. That's something I hope you guys will talk about in your class. It's just an open question. Now, there's another level to this. Let's look at.
Keep your jelly away from my eggs.
So not interested.
I've heard that line before.
Oh. Oh, what's the point? Oh.
Zoidberg. So he's doing his mating dance and his mating call, and he's putting out his mating smells, just like any good flower or any good bowerbird or any rutting animal or any human, right? There's a mating dance, there's a mating call, and there are mating smells, pheromones. So now we're not looking at who's the strongest. He will have to be selected by a female for him to be able to pass on his genetics, right? So this isn't about who's strongest. This isn't about who, now it could be in a very dark situation. The strong may overpower and insist on their genetics. But there's also a really clear, and we see alpha males, we see bulls, we see basically, you know, kind of apex predators that will effectively have a harem of females, and they will be the only male. That exists with lions, that exists with sea lions. However, in a lot of situations, it doesn't work that way. The bowerbird, for example, what a cool creature. The bowerbird, bowerbirds create gargantuan nests, sometimes 6 feet tall, going up a tree trunk. Not just a nest, it's just this incredible structure. And in fact, some bowerbirds are so sophisticated that they will take a little stick, they will poke that little stick into a berry, and they will paint their house. And I would wager a bet that they're not the only species that attracts lovers by through a well-painted house. So this idea is that there's an actual need to attract desire, not to dominate the world, not to take what you want, not to insist that you will be, but actually to attract the desire for your continued existence. This is a very important part of natural selection. On one level, this is as simple as, you know, the corn that we pick. The corn has gone from this tiny little bitty corn maize to these giant corn that we have now, leaving the genetic stuff aside. Most of that has actually come from selection. We just pick the biggest, best corn, and then we plant that corn. That wasn't because it was more dominant or more able to grow or more able to survive. We picked it, right? So the same happens, and typically, often as females that have to pick a male. They might fight over it, but ultimately the female will have to pick a male. And if you see something like a play, like Lysistrata, great play, and it was remade by, oh shoot, come to me. Spike Lee. And in Spike Lee's version, basically what happens in the Lysistrata is the women are not happy with how the men are being. So the women just say, there will be no more sex, there will be no more babies until you guys are like what I want you to be. And this is a really important thing. Sometimes change isn't because of some new strength. It's because of some new taste, some new desire, some new sensibility, right? The incredible colors of a male bird didn't come about because they were helpful camouflage. The opposite. They came about because they attracted a mate. And so this is something I hope you guys will ask yourselves. What's more powerful, right? The strength of being able to win and defeat and be strong, or to be attractive and seductive and desirable? And then ask yourself, what is more important when attracting someone, brawn or brain? Think about it for yourself. We all actually have very different attitudes and ideas. And one of the things that's very important is notice the variation. We all might want something different in a lover. And the same, hopefully, is true with crabs and penguins who mate for life, right? So we're looking for different things. Well, the differences set up variation and variability, right? Which is a good thing for evolution. When you start to have a single genetic line, you enter into extreme vulnerability. And this is something that we're becoming increasingly concerned with when it comes to our own crops. We're afraid of having just one or two types of corn. We need variation for stability. Okay, so predator versus prey, attraction versus dominance, brain versus brawn, Futurama. Okay, so let's look at another level of evolution. Why evolution? Where does it come from? Now, is it a result of me thinking, oh man, I really wish I could fly? Or like, you know, it would be just so much more useful if I could get that freaking finger over here to be more opposable, right? That's the idea that there might be some conscious agency. You see these giraffes here that are looking for Lamarck. They're looking at the leaves that they want to eat. And it's that desire that is going to give some sort of conscious directionality to the evolution. Darwin completely disagreed. For Darwin, it's that there's some sort of, you know, you just got lucky. One of you had a random mutation and happened to be able to eat the leaves that are taller in the tree. And that one happened to survive more. And so that random mutation ended up getting to stick around. So for Darwin, it's about random mutations working out in the favor of an animal. And then that animal's random mutation becoming the new primary, starting to displace previous populations because of their superior advantages. So ask yourself this. Do you think that the wing, the ability to fly, came as a random step? There are a whole bunch of random steps that worked us towards the wing over time. Or was there some sort of vision? Was there a desire for a wing? And then, of course, there's another concept, the idea that there's almost a grand plan, some divine vision into which things are moving. So ultimately, the theorists, the evolutionary biologists, came to really side with Darwin very clearly. There is no conscious desire for evolution that leads to change, period. Right? There's only lucky mutations, random mutations in the genes that happen to play out and happen to work out and result in somebody being more fit and then surviving more and then driving the evolution. The other kind of dimension of Lamarckian evolution that's important to think about is this kind of idea that like the more you use something, the more it will evolve. Right. So the more that you are using your hands, the more your hands might kind of change and evolve. A couple things to think about. So y'all debate, think about Lamarckian and Darwinian evolution. And as you do, let's look at this difference between genotype and phenotype. You know what DNA is, right? That dinucleic acid. We all have chromosomes. We all have DNA, unique DNA, the whole XY, XX chromosome thing. By the way, lots of variations. There are people out there that are XXY, XYY, all kinds of interesting stuff. So what is a phenotype? The phenotype is the expression of your genes given the environment they're in. So it's not as simple as just having genes. Your genes will express themselves based on different environments. So question becomes can a phenotype be a little bit more Lamarckian, right? So let's look at a certain question. This is called epigenetics. We're not going to get into the actual science of epigenetics. The point is that this is about how we translate the DNA into actual lived expression. And effectively, this is to do with kind of turning off and turning on different genes so that they're more active at different times. So can the questions are, can epigenetics be Lamarckian? This is an ongoing question. A very interesting question, actually. So one of the things we found is a very interesting study. The Dutch went through a major winter, a major hunger issue, a famine. And this happened around 70 years ago. And when this famine happened, a couple interesting things emerged. One, the women who were pregnant before the famine started had children that struggled far more than women who got pregnant after the famine had started. And it seems to be the case that the women who had begun adjusting to the reduced food, to the famine, it seems that they passed on this adjustment to their own phenotype. The adjustment, not the change in their DNA, but a change in the expression of their DNA. They seem to have passed on that phenotype change to their children. And this seems to be evidenced by the fact that those children did a lot better with reduced food than those that came before them. They were able to make it work in a certain way. Now, what's really interesting, now it's been so long that those children have had children. And what we can find with these 3 generations, we can find that actually there is an ongoing, a persistent change in that 3rd generation. It's a little bit beyond me to get into the actual details of what that change is. The important part for you is to recognize that there was a change as a result of the environment that lasted a couple generations that did not include a change in the DNA. So there was a response to the environment that resulted in a response to the phenotype and the way that our DNA turns on, which was passed down to a child, passed down to a grandchild. This is very new stuff. We haven't had these studies around for very long. So a lot of the old conversations about evolution and DNA are just catching up to integrating this type of conversation. Depends on how old the textbook is. It's not something that the jury's really, to be honest, a little bit out. There's some people who debate whether this is real, but most scientists no longer do. Most scientists do recognize that epigenetics and phenotypes are passed down. And this study is the primary study that's convincing to many, many people. So this is to say that I can react to my environment and pass down that reaction to my children. This seems to be a little bit more Lamarckian, but that's another great debate. Okay, so evolution, we had to talk a little bit about DNA, had to talk a little bit about phenotypes. Let's now talk about social Darwinism, right? So Darwinism, this idea of survival of the fittest. We all saw Game of Thrones, right? Who gets to wear the crown at the end? This is a survival of the fittest story. There's a morality that emerges from survival of the fittest, right? To be the best, you got to be the fittest. And this can result in a lot of things. And I'm not going to go through too many, but I hope that you guys will, in your class, engage this question. What type of morality emerges from a belief that the world is all built from survival of the fittest? Everything came from survival of the fittest. It turns the world into a competition, which means that there are winners and losers, which means that you want to be a winner, which means you're fine with turning other people into losers. So deepen that a little bit more. Explore this question. How has Darwinism become social Darwinism, become a morality, and what are the implications of that morality? What about the whole idea of random mutations as a morality? The idea that the changes we have are not a result of a plan of God, and they're not a result of your own consciousness or an internal change or something like that. It's not about agency. All the evolutionary breakthroughs, every evolutionary step is random mutation. It just happens to work out. If you go too far down that rabbit hole of randomness, you get into a certain conversation around absurdity. And absurdity just means there's no meaning, right? There's not a meaning to explain this. This is a big conversation that comes from the philosopher Camus. So if everything is random, there's no design, no plan, it's not about your own free will, it's not about your consciousness, it's not about your soul. Now where are we morally? Does anything matter? Evolution came out of a deeper paradigm. We've been talking about paradigms, right? And how different paradigms of thought, different perspectives that are beneath the conversation shape the conversation, right? So beneath the conversation of evolution is a deeper conversation about the Enlightenment. This is the Enlightenment paradigm. So the Enlightenment paradigm is really put forward by Newton in a major way, which is of course complicated because Newton was himself not limited entirely to the Newtonian paradigm, but that happens. You know, Jung wouldn't want to be called a Jungian, and I'm sure Campbell wouldn't want to be called a Campbellian. I'm not sure Darwin would want to be called a Darwinian, but that's another story. So Newton. Newton did something really interesting, and when he kind of solidified the Enlightenment paradigm. Everybody had always believed, not everybody, I'm sorry, scientists, philosophers, there had always been this growing notion that everything makes sense, that the material world makes sense, right? Like that you can break it down into math and laws and rules, and it would all make sense. But those rules, that math was far from described until Newton. Newton gave us the math. He said, okay, you think that cannonball goes like this? I can actually predict it every time. Cannonballs can go that distance because you're sending it at that arc with that amount of force, etc. Right? And it weighs this much. He came up with the math, calculus, to make sense of trajectories. He came up with a lot of math, actually. And his math just kept making sense of the world. And he made sense of the world based on another deeper assumption, that everything is material and atomistic. And so that all these atoms, so the whole universe is just made up, in the Enlightenment paradigm, the whole universe is just made up of atoms. And for the Enlightenment, atoms were especially associated with billiard balls. So you see here the billiard ball atoms. Hume would also talk about billiard ball atoms, right? So billiard ball atoms, you might also say building block atoms, Legos, whatever. The point is that they're material things. And so everything from the Enlightenment paradigm is made up of separate material things, atomized material things. So in the same way that this cup is a thing, two things cannot be in the same place at the same time. That is a rule of things, right? Make this about atoms. Atom A, atom B, right? Now they're just super tiny. And the idea is that everything is made up of super tiny atoms. Now I could, put this here, hang it there. Now I've combined these things, but they're really still separate, right? The point is, before the theory of evolution came out of a paradigm that was already committed to this idea of everything being material and all material being separate and in isolation. So atoms, also that the idea, now there were some Enlightenment thinkers who were all over the place about their thoughts about free will, but the core idea of atomism, and it goes all the way back to the first atomist in ancient Greece, Leucippus and Democritus, at least Democritus. Leucippus is a shadowy figure that may or may not have existed, but Democritus believed in atheism. He was an atheist. He said, we're just material stuff. He didn't believe in a soul. He does say some poetic things that have to do with gods. That's kind of very confusing, but he very much does not believe in a soul. He says that we are all just a bunch of atoms. When we die, those atoms part and scatter, and that there's no consciousness other than what emerges from those atoms. We're just made up a bunch of separate bits, right? So why be afraid of the afterlife, he says. This continued. This is a foundational perspective for the Enlightenment, and all the way into the founding fathers of the United States. all Enlightenment atomists, many of them deists, but that's another story. Some of them believed in free will, like Benjamin Franklin, who believed that every now and then an atom would just swerve. And he got this idea from Lucretius, an old Roman atomist, a poet, who said, sometimes the atoms just swerve, and that's where you have free will. Otherwise, they're going in completely calculated basic trajectories that it can be translated by their math, made sense of through their math, okay? All right, so here's the point. If you see the world is made up of a bunch of separate atoms, and you see yourself as made up of a bunch of separate atoms, and you don't think you have a soul, and you don't think you have free will, right? Well, a couple things start to emerge just straight out of that paradigm. One, you see yourself as an isolation. So if you look here, you see the picture of the front of the Leviathan by Hobbes. This is a political ideological text. But what you see in this image is all these different individuals that make up one body. So now we're going from the idea of, atoms making up a thing, organs making up a person, to people making up a body politic. But the point is they're all separate individual people that are now for Hobbes, completely controlled hierarchically. Everything must submit to the topmost power, which is divine for him. So the king is divinely appointed, and so everything should follow the governance of that king, which is representing the governance of the Lord. And so what you see here is a super fittest survival, the ultimately most fit, now organizing everything else, right? So here's the issue. We go back here. So what matters, right? Random mutations. We have the same issue already happening with atomism. No free will. What matters? Everything's going in random directions. Social Darwinism, right? Just survival of the fittest. This is about me, my individuality becoming excellent, the best it can be, right? But this is built on the idea that I am separate, that I am an individual, which is reinforced by the deeper paradigm of atomism. So the idea of the atom, that I am that atoms are separate. I now extrapolate this and make sense of myself this way. I am separate. So the point is that by the time you get to the paradigm of enlightenment, it's built on the paradigm, by the time you get to the paradigm of evolution, it's built on the paradigm of atomism. Okay, so these are the main points that we wanted to get through in the conversation about evolution. Survival of the fittest and natural selection. Darwin versus Lamarck. Is evolution towards improvement or lucky accidents over time? Genotypes versus phenotypes, the recognition that our genes do change to express themselves in relationship with the world, and we may even be able to pass on those adjustments, the phenotype changes, which may or may not be Lamarckian. And then we recognize that this whole conversation, all these conversations are politicized around the question of religion and science, and that beneath all these conversations are deeper paradigms, deeper ways that we see the world. Now, in one deeper paradigm may be that we are seeing the world through the lens of enlightenment, but another paradigm might be colonial, right? So there might be an egoistic motivation to say, oh no, those people are inferior, so we should subjugate them, right? Or I want to be subjugating people, so I would like a philosophy that says that's the right thing to do, right? Because I want to be powerful and rich and strong and have all the resources in the world. And how is that morally okay, right? So sometimes we look for morality to fit our desires. And what desires does the morality that emerges from this theory point to? What desires does this theory enable, right? That's a question that I'll leave for you guys to engage in your class session.